The cell was dark, cold, and smelled of rusted metal and old blood. For 13 long years, Lyra had known nothing else. Her wrists and ankles were chained to the wall, the heavy metal biting into her skin. She could not remember the last time. She felt the sun. The alien Baron had taken her when she was just a child. And since then, she had been his prisoner. Sometimes he came to see her, not out of care, but to remind her she belonged to him. He would walk in with his long black coat dragging on the floor, his cold eyes scanning her like she was nothing more than a broken tool. Every visit brought pain, sometimes in the form of cruel words, sometimes in the form of the whip. Lyra had stopped crying years ago. Tears felt like a waste. But her heart still beat faster whenever she heard the heavy footsteps coming down the corridor. The sound came now, echoing through the narrow hall. Her chains rattled as she tried to make herself smaller. The heavy iron door creaked open, and light from the hallway spilled into the cell. It was not the Baron this time, but one of his guards, tall and broad. With armor scratched from years of battle, he threw a piece of stale bread at her feet and left without a word, locking the door again. Lyra stared at the bread, hungry but tired of the cycle. Still, hunger always won, and she picked it up, chewing. Slowly, outside the cell, the world was changing, though she could not see it. The Baron's fortress was under attack. Far away in the main halls, explosions shook the walls. The guards shouted orders, the ground trembled. Lyra looked up, confused. In 13 years, she had never heard this kind of chaos. Something was happening, something dangerous. The air grew thick with the smell of smoke. She heard screams and then silence. Her heart pounded in her chest. Then, with a loud metallic click, her cell door unlocked by itself. Lyra froze, her mind racing. Was this a trap? Was someone playing with her? No one had ever opened her cell without orders from the Baron. Slowly, she stood, the chain still around her wrists and ankles making her movements slow and heavy. She stepped toward the door, her legs shaking from weakness. Outside, the corridor was empty. For the first time in 13 years, she could step beyond the cold stone walls of her prison. Her heart screamed at her to run, but her mind whispered of the dangers outside. The Baron's guards would kill her if they caught her, but staying meant certain death if the fortress fell. Another explosion rocked the ground, knocking her against the wall. This time she didn't hesitate. Lyra stumbled forward, moving as fast as her chained legs would allow. The corridors were filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. She passed rooms she had never seen before, rooms with strange glowing weapons, alien armor, and banners with the Baron's crest. Her ears caught the distant roar of something huge. Perhaps one of the Baron's war beasts. Her fear pushed her faster. A loud crash came from behind her. She turned and saw a shadow moving through the smoke tall, heavy, and coming straight toward her. Her breath caught, and she forced herself to limp run down the hall. The shadow grew closer, her chains dragged against the ground, slowing her down. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. But then she saw it, the outer gates, wide open, broken by some great force. Beyond them lay the forest, dark but free. She could hear the pounding footsteps of the thing chasing her. Every instinct told her she would die if she looked back. Her bare feet hit the cold ground outside the gate. The forest air was sharp and fresh, so different from the foul prison air. She kept running until her body gave out, falling to her knees. She gasped for breath. Behind her, the fortress burned, flames reaching into the sky. Screams echoed in the distance, and the roar of the war beast faded away. Lyra didn't know if she had truly escaped. She didn't know if the Baron was alive or dead. All she knew was that for the first time in 13 years, there were no walls around her. But freedom in this strange and dangerous world was no guarantee of safety. Somewhere out there, the Baron's hunters would come for her, and she had no idea that her path was about to cross with a human, someone who would change her life forever. The forest was not silent. Every leaf, every branch seemed to move in the cold night wind. Lyra's bare feet sank into damp soil. the sharp roots cutting into her skin. The chains on her ankles rattled with every step, making it impossible to move. Quietly, she didn't know where she was going. Only that she needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and the burning fortress. Her breath came in short gasps. She leaned against a twisted tree, its bark rough under her fingers. Above her, strange glowing insects floated. In the air, casting pale blue light, somewhere deep in the forest, something howled. It was not human. And it made the small hairs on the back of her neck stand. Lyra knew this planet's wilderness was full of dangers. She had heard the Baron's guards speak of the Forest of Hunters, a place where even soldiers rarely returned. But she had no choice. The forest was her only chance to hide. The Baron's men would expect her to run toward villages, not into the wild. She prayed they would not follow her here. A sudden snap echoed behind her. She froze. Slowly, she turned her head. The shadows between the trees seemed thicker, as if something was watching her. Her heart began to race again. She stepped forward, trying to be quiet, but the chain scraped against a rock, the sound far too loud in the stillness. There was another sound, low, deep breathing, not hers. She forced herself to keep moving. Her legs were weak from years of captivity, but fear gave her strength. Branches clawed at her arms and face, leaving thin scratches. The breathing grew closer. Then it happened. Her right ankle caught in something. Metal. A hidden trap snapped shut, biting into her skin with sharp teeth. Lyra cried out, falling hard to the ground. Pain shot up her leg. She tried to pull free, but the more she moved, the tighter it held. Her hands trembled as she pulled at the mechanism, but it wouldn't open. The sound of movement came again, heavier this time. She could see something moving between the trees. Two glowing eyes stared at her from the darkness, unblinking. She couldn't tell what it was, but its shape was huge, and its growl was low and hungry. Her breaths came fast. She reached for a branch on the ground, gripping it like a weapon. The creature stepped closer, its form finely visible, a long muscular body, covered in dark fur, claws glinting under the pale blue insect light. It was a hunter beast, one the Baron used to track runaway slaves. It lowered its head, ready to pounce. Lyra's mind screamed at her to fight, but her body was frozen. The beast lunged. A sharp, loud sound cracked through the forest. The beast stopped mid-leap, yelped, and darted back into the shadows. Lyra blinked in shock. From the darkness ahead, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes and carrying something long in his hands. It was not an alien she recognized. It was a human. He moved quickly to her side, kneeling to examine the trap. His face was serious, his eyes scanning her wound. Without a word, he pulled a small tool from his belt and began working on the mechanism. The trap clicked open, and Lyra's ankle was free, though blood ran down her foot. She expected him to take advantage of her weakness, like so many others before. Instead, he took a cloth from his pack and wrapped her wound. "You're lucky I was nearby," he said in a calm, steady voice. His words felt strange to her ears. Humans spoke differently than the Baron's kind. She didn't answer, still staring at him. He glanced at her chains, his brow furrowing. "You've been a prisoner," he stated, not asked. She lowered her gaze, afraid to tell him more. The human stood and offered her his hand. She hesitated. Her entire life had been ruled by cruelty and control, and trust was something she had forgotten how to give. But the sound of the beast returning in the distance made her choice for her. She took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet. He supported her weight as they moved deeper into the forest. They walked in silence for a long time. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to close in around them. Finally, they reached a small hidden shelter built into the side of a hill. The human guided her inside, lighting a small lantern. It was warm compared to the night air. He handed her a flask of water. She stared at it for a moment before drinking greedily, water spilling down her chin. "I'm Ethan," he said quietly. She still didn't speak, but she gave a small nod. He didn't press her for answers. Instead, he sat near the entrance, Keeping watch, Lyra sat in the corner, the warmth of the shelter seeping into her bones. For the first time in years, she was not in a cage. But her mind whispered that safety never lasted. She had no idea who this human really was. And she didn't yet know that he had already decided, if the Baron came for her, he would fight to the death. The fire in the small lantern flickered softly. Ethan sat near the entrance of the shelter, his back against the wall, his weapon resting across his lap. Lyra sat in the corner, hugging her knees, the chains around her wrists and ankles cold. Against her skin, the warmth inside the shelter was a comfort, but her heart still raced. She had never been this close to a human before. She had heard stories, some good, most bad, about how they were dangerous, unpredictable, and quick to betray. Ethan watched her quietly. She avoided his gaze, pretending to study the dirt floor. He noticed how thin she was. Her skin pale from years without sunlight. Her eyes held a tiredness far beyond her years. He had seen that look before, on soldiers who had survived too many battles. "Eat this," he said finally, holding out a small piece of dried meat. She stared at it for a moment before taking it with trembling hands. Her teeth sank into it slowly, as if expecting it to be poisoned outside. The wind howled through the forest. Somewhere far away, a branch snapped. Ethan's head turned instantly toward the sound. He didn't relax until the noise faded. The forest of hunters was no place to let your guard down. He glanced back at Lyra. "You're safe here for now," he said in a low voice. "For now," echoed in her head, a reminder that safety was always temporary. Hours passed before she spoke. Her voice was quiet, as if afraid the trees outside might hear. "You should leave me," she whispered. Ethan frowned. "Why would I do that?" he asked. She looked at him, her eyes full of something between fear and guilt. "They'll come for me. The Baron's men, his beasts. They always come," she said. "They will kill you if you stay with me." Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice steady and certain. "Then they'll have to kill me first," he said. The words stunned her. No one had ever spoken like that for her. People only saved themselves. Never her. She lowered her gaze, unsure how to answer. Her chains rattled as she shifted her position. Ethan noticed and reached for his pack, pulling out a small set of tools. "Let me see those," he said. Pointing to her wrists, she hesitated, then slowly extended her arms. The cold metal had dug deep into her skin over the years, leaving scars and sores. Ethan worked carefully, his hands steady. With a soft click, one of the shackles came loose. Lyra stared at her freed wrist in disbelief. It felt lighter, almost unreal. He moved to the second shackle, freeing it as well. When both her wrists were free, she rubbed them gently. It had been 13 years since she felt that kind of freedom. Even in such a small way. Ethan didn't smile, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "We'll get the ones off your ankles when we have more light," he said. "They're harder to remove without the right tools." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Something in her chest felt tight, a strange mix of relief and fear. She had no reason to trust this human, and yet she wanted to. It scared her more than the Baron's beasts. The night grew colder, and Ethan added more fuel to the small fire. "You should rest," he told her. She shook her head. "I can't," she whispered. "If I sleep, I dream of the chains." Of his voice. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't push her. Instead, he sat back down and began cleaning his weapon. The slow, methodical work calming the silence. Outside, an eerie howl rose in the distance. Lyra tensed, recognizing the sound. It was one of the Baron's tracker beasts. Ethan heard it too, and his eyes narrowed. "They're close," she said in a trembling voice. Ethan stood, checking the rifle in his hands. "They'll find the fortress burned, then they'll search the forest," he said. "We need to move before dawn." Lyra's throat tightened. She had been running all night. Her body was weak, but she knew he was right. If the Baron's men caught them, there would be no second escape. Ethan moved to the back of the shelter, pulling out a small bag of supplies. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, even though her legs still ached. He didn't question her answer. Instead, he handed her a thin cloak. "Keep this on. It'll hide your chains and keep you warm," he said. For a moment, they stood in silence. The forest outside was alive with unseen movement. Ethan glanced at her one last time before speaking. "I don't know what they did to you," he said, his tone firm but gentle, "but you're not theirs anymore." His words sank into her like the first sunlight after years of darkness. She didn't reply, but something deep inside her began to shift. A small, fragile spark, the kind that could one day become trust. As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, Ethan opened the shelter's door. The cold morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and danger. They stepped into the shadowy forest, leaving the warmth of the shelter behind. Lyra didn't know where they were going, but she knew one thing. For the first time in 13 years, someone had promised to stand between her and the chains, and she didn't want to lose that. The Baron's fortress still burned. Smoke rose into the alien sky, curling into the cold morning air. But far from the flames, the Baron himself stood in the shadow of his warship, his cold eyes watching the horizon. His black armor reflected the firelight as he gave the order no one wanted to hear. "Bring her back alive," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The soldiers bowed quickly, knowing what would happen if they failed. Beside the Baron stood 3 massive tracker beasts. Their bodies were covered in thick black fur, claws long enough to tear through steel. They growled softly, eager for the hunt. The Baron pointed toward the forest. "She won't get far, not in her condition," he said. "Go." The beasts leapt forward, their heavy paws shaking the ground. Behind them, the Baron's elite hunters followed, silent, armored, and carrying weapons that could cut a man in half. They moved with the precision of predators. They had done this before, many times, and almost no one had ever escaped. Deep in the forest, Ethan and Lyra moved quickly. The cold air stung their faces. Every step was careful. Every sound around them made them stop and listen. Lyra's chains still rattled softly, despite the cloak hiding them. Ethan knew the noise could give them away, but there was no time to fix it now. They passed through thick undergrowth, the damp leaves brushing against their legs. Insects buzzed in the dim light. Somewhere above, alien birds called to one another, their cries sharp and echoing. But there was another sound, low and steady, coming from far behind. It was faint now, but Ethan recognized it instantly. "They're using trackers," he said. Lyra's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what that meant. They picked up the pace. Ethan scanned the terrain for anything that could cover their trail. He led her through a shallow stream, letting the cold water hide their scent. Lyra shivered, the icy current biting into her skin. Still, she didn't complain. She knew the beasts would kill them if they stopped. Hours passed, and the sound of pursuit grew louder. Sometimes it was the snap of a branch, sometimes a distant growl. Every time, Ethan would push her to move faster. They reached a narrow ravine, the walls steep and covered in moss. "This way," Ethan said, helping her climb down. The ground here was softer, muffling their footsteps. But they weren't alone. A shadow moved at the top of the ravine. Ethan froze, pulling Lyra against the wall. 2 hunters appeared, scanning the ground. Their armor glinted in the weak light, their weapons ready. Ethan's hand tightened on his rifle, but he didn't fire. One wrong move and more would come. The hunters paused, sniffing the air. Lyra's breath caught. She pressed her back harder against the cold stone, praying they wouldn't look down. After what felt like hours, the hunters moved on, disappearing into the trees. Ethan didn't relax until their footsteps were gone. "We can't keep running like this," he said. "They'll push us until we collapse." Back at the warship, the Baron watched a holomap showing the forest, small red markers tracked his hunters and beasts, one by one. The hunters reported in no contact yet, but they were closing in. The Baron's lips curled into a thin smile. "She's scared," he said, almost to himself. "She make a mistake soon." The lead tracker beast lifted its head, sniffing the wind. Its ears twitched, catching something deep in the trees. With a low growl, it changed direction. The hunters followed without question. By late afternoon, Ethan and Lyra reached higher ground. From here, they could see a distant ridge. "If we get over that ridge, there's an old mining outpost," Ethan said. "Maybe we can find transport there." Lyra nodded, though her legs felt like they would give out at any moment. They started toward the ridge, but halfway up, the wind shifted. Lyra froze. A sound rolled through the forest, deep, powerful, and close. It was the tracker beast's roar. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "They found our trail," he said. He grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. Branches whipped against them as they ran. The sound of pursuit was no longer distant. It was all around them. Hunters moved through the trees like shadows, their armor blending with the forest. The beast's heavy steps shook the ground. Lyra's ankle chains caught on a root, sending her crashing to the ground. Ethan turned instantly, hauling her back to her feet. "We're not stopping," he said firmly. They burst through the last line of trees and saw the ridge ahead. But the beast was right behind them now, its breath hot in the cold air. Ethan spun, raising his rifle. The first shot cracked through the forest, hitting the beast's shoulder. It roared in pain but didn't slow. Ethan fired again, this time forcing it to stumble. "Go!" he shouted. Lyra ran, her legs burning. Behind her, the sounds of gunfire and growls filled the air. When she reached the top of the ridge, she turned back. Ethan was still there, fighting, and in that moment, she realized he wasn't just helping her escape. He was willing to die to keep his promise. The sun was sinking behind the ridge. Shadows stretched long over the rocky ground. Ethan and Lyra moved quickly, their breathing heavy from the climb. The mining outpost was still far away, but the sight of the open land ahead gave them hope. The forest was behind them now, but the danger was not. Ethan's sharp eyes scanned the terrain. It looked empty, too empty. He knew this kind of silence. He had seen it in war. Silence before the attack. "Stay close to me," he murmured. Lyra nodded, clutching the thin cloak around her, hiding the glint of her ankle chains. They started down a narrow path between two rock walls. The wind whistled through the gap, carrying dust and the faint scent of metal. Ethan slowed, every instinct warning him. Lyra sensed it too, her stomach tightening. Something was wrong. Then it happened. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Before they could react, nets dropped from above. The weighted ropes tangled around them, pulling them to the ground. Lyra cried out. Struggling against the heavy mesh, Ethan twisted hard, his hand reaching for the knife on his belt. From the top of the rocks, figures appeared, Baron's hunters. Their black armor gleamed in the fading light. They moved with precision, weapons raised. One of them shouted an order, and more appeared, blocking the path ahead. Ethan cut through the net with quick, strong motions. "Run!" he barked, pulling Lyra free. They sprinted toward the open ground, but the hunters were ready. Two of them stepped into their path. Blades in hand, Ethan didn't hesitate. He charged forward, swinging the butt of his rifle into the first hunter's face. The man went down hard, his helmet cracking against the rock. The second lunged at Ethan, but Lyra reacted without thinking. She grabbed a loose rock and smashed it into the hunter's side. The blow made him stumble, giving Ethan the chance to take him down. More hunters closed in. Ethan fired his rifle, forcing them to scatter. The sound echoed across the ridge, startling flocks of alien birds into the sky. "Keep moving," he shouted. They ran again, weaving between jagged rocks. But the path ahead narrowed to a dead end. Ethan swore under his breath. The hunters were closing in from both sides now. Lyra's heart pounded. Trapped again, just like in the cell. Her breathing grew fast and shallow. Ethan grabbed her shoulders, his voice sharp but steady. "Listen to me, we're getting out of this," he said. His eyes locked on hers. Unshaken. "No one is taking you back." The first hunter reached them. Swinging a blade at Ethan's head, Ethan ducked, catching the man's arm and twisting hard. The blade clattered to the ground. Ethan kicked the hunter back into the others, buying a few seconds, but there were too many. One of the hunters raised a strange weapon. It hissed, and a glowing net shot out, wrapping around Lyra's arms. She screamed, the energy burning her skin. Ethan roared in anger, tackling the man and smashing his head into the rocks. He tore the net off Lyra, his hands moving fast. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, even though the pain still burned. Suddenly, a deep growl came from behind the hunters. Everyone froze. From the shadows between the rocks, the tracker beast appeared, its glowing eyes fixed on Lyra. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. The hunters glanced at each other. They had not expected their own beast to arrive without a handler. The creature stepped forward, its massive claws digging into the dirt. Ethan fired a shot into the ground near its feet. The beast snarled, confused. Its attention split between the hunters and the humans. Ethan saw the moment of hesitation and acted. "Now!" he shouted, grabbing Lyra's hand and pulling her toward a narrow gap between the rocks. They squeezed through, the rough stone tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the beast roared, and the hunters shouted orders. Ethan fired blindly over his shoulder, the flashes lighting the dark passage. The narrow path widened suddenly, opening into a hidden drop. Without slowing, Ethan jumped, pulling Lyra with him. They landed hard on a slope of sand and tumbled down. Dust filled the air, and the sounds of pursuit grew faint. When they finally stopped, Lyra coughed, pushing herself up. Ethan sat beside her. Breathing hard, they were bruised, scraped, and exhausted. But they were alive. Ethan looked at her, his voice low but firm. "They're not going to stop. Not until one of us is dead," he said. Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt like a fighter. Night had fallen over the desert ridge. The stars above shone cold and distant. The wind carried a low hum, whispering through the rocks like voices from another time. Ethan and Lyra sat in the shadow of a cliff, hidden from the open ground. Both were breathing hard from the escape, but neither dared to relax completely. Ethan was busy checking his rifle. He counted his remaining ammo, too little for the number of hunters after them. The beast's roar still echoed in his ears, reminding him how close they had come to dying. Lyra sat nearby, rubbing her wrists where the shackles had once been. The marks were deep, the skin raw, but for the first time she could move her hands freely. "We can't just keep running," Ethan said finally. "They'll push us into a corner sooner or later." Lyra's eyes lowered to the sand. "That's what the Baron does," she whispered. "He waits until you're too tired to fight." Ethan glanced at her. "Then we don't give him the chance," he said. "We're going to the mining outpost, and from there, we'll get to the human port." Her eyes widened slightly. "You'd risk the port for me?" she asked. Ethan didn't even blink. "I gave you my word," he replied. But there was a problem. The mining outpost was at least 2 days away on foot. They had no transport, and the Baron's forces were faster. If they followed the normal routes, they'd be caught before sunrise. Ethan began drawing in the sand with a small stick. He sketched the ridge, the forest behind them, and the wide valley ahead. "There's a canyon here," he said, pointing to a winding line. "It's dangerous narrow, unstable, but it cuts a full day off the trip." Lyra studied the drawing. "What's in the canyon?" she asked. "Old tunnels," Ethan said, "from when this land was mined for fuel, or most of them collapsed years ago." He paused. "But if we find the right one, it could take us straight under the Baron's patrol lines." Lyra's brow furrowed. "And if we find the wrong one?" she asked. "Then we die in the dark," Ethan answered without hesitation. The calm way he said it sent a chill through her. But there was no other choice. They set off under the cover of night. The sand was cold under their feet, the air sharp and dry. The moonlight painted the rocks silver. Every so often, Ethan stopped, listening for distant movement. Twice, they heard faint growls carried by the wind. The beasts were still out there, following their trail. By dawn, they reached the mouth of the canyon. It yawned wide before them, the shadows inside thick and heavy. The walls rose high, blocking most of the morning light. Lyra shivered, not from the cold, but from the feeling of being swallowed whole. Ethan led the way, his rifle ready. The ground here was uneven, broken by jagged stones and deep cracks. Every sound seemed louder, bouncing off the canyon walls. They moved slowly, careful not to twist an ankle or make too much noise. Lyra's chains tapped softly against the rock. Ethan frowned at the sound, without a word. He knelt and began working on them with his tools. The metal finally gave way with a dull snap. Lyra stared at her bare ankles, almost not believing it. The weight was gone. She took a deep breath. Her steps suddenly lighter. They continued deeper until they found what Ethan was looking for. An old mining shaft carved into the canyon wall. Its entrance was half buried by rock and sand. Ethan cleared it enough for them to slip inside. The air was cooler here, thick with the smell of dust and stone. Lyra followed him through the narrow tunnel, her hands brushing the rough walls. The darkness closed around them, only the dim beam from Ethan's small lantern lit the way. Every creak of shifting rock made Lyra flinch. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped slowly, the sound echoing like footsteps. They moved in silence for what felt like hours. The tunnel twisted and narrowed, forcing them to crouch in places. Suddenly, Ethan stopped, holding up a hand. Lyra froze. From somewhere behind, faint noises reached them. Not rocks, not water. Footsteps. They found us, Ethan said in a low voice. He pulled her forward, quickening the pace. The tunnel began to slope downward, opening into a wider chamber. In the middle of the chamber stood an old mining cart. Its tracks led into another tunnel on the far side. Ethan inspected it quickly. "It'll move," he said, pushing it onto the track. "Get in." Lyra climbed in without argument. Ethan shoved the cart hard, then jumped in beside her. The wheels screeched, but the cart began to roll. Behind them, shouts echoed in the darkness. The hunters were in the tunnel now, their boots hitting the stone hard. Ethan gripped the side of the cart, pushing with his foot to keep their speed. The air rushed past them, carrying the smell of old oil and rust. Ahead, faint light appeared. Lyra's heart leapt, but then she saw it. The track was broken ahead, the cart heading straight for a gap over a deep drop. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Hold on," he said, and as the hunters closed in behind them, he made a decision that could either save them or kill them both. The broken track rushed toward them. The air in the tunnel grew colder, sharper. Ethan's eyes stayed locked on the gap, calculating every second. Behind them, the hunters' shouts echoed, growing louder. The metallic clink of their armor mixed with the deep growl of the tracker beast. Lyra gripped the sides of the cart, her knuckles white. "What do we do?" she cried over the sound of screeching wheels. Ethan didn't answer with words. He moved. Just before the break, he grabbed her and pulled them both out of the cart. They hit the ground hard, rolling across the rough stone. The cart flew off the broken track and vanished into the black pit below. The sound of its crash echoed for a long time. Ethan pulled Lyra to her feet. "This way," he said, his voice urgent. They darted into a narrow side passage, low enough that they had to crouch. The hunters reached the broken track seconds later. Their leader snarled, "After them," he ordered, but the narrow tunnel slowed them. Ethan pushed ahead, guiding Lyra through twists and sharp turns. The walls dripped with moisture, the air heavy and damp. Every now and then, a faint beam of moonlight shone through cracks in the stone. The passage ended at a small opening that looked out over the valley. Far below, the desert stretched out under the silver light of the twin moons. Lyra's breath caught. They were high up on the cliffside, with no safe way down. Ethan scanned the rocks and spotted a narrow ledge running along the cliff. "We follow that," he said. "It'll take us to the mining outpost." They stepped out, the wind instantly trying to push them off balance. Lyra pressed against the wall, the drop beside her making her dizzy. Ethan moved ahead, checking each step before signaling her to follow. Halfway along, a shadow passed overhead. Ethan looked up and swore under his breath. The Baron's warship hovered above, its searchlights sweeping the cliff. A beam of light caught them. Shouts erupted from the warship's deck. Hunters on jetpacks launched from the side. Descending toward the ledge, Ethan spun, pulling Lyra behind him. He fired at the first hunter, sending him crashing against the cliff. The second landed on the ledge, blade in hand. Ethan blocked the strike with his rifle. The sound of metal clashing echoing in the night. Lyra ducked, grabbing a loose piece of rock. She slammed it into the hunter's knee. He staggered, and Ethan finished him with a hard blow to the helmet. More hunters descended, their boots slamming onto the narrow stone. The ledge shook under the weight. Ethan knew they couldn't hold this position for long. Then the growl came, deeper and closer than before. From the side of the cliff, the tracker beast leapt onto the ledge, its claws sinking into the stone. Its glowing eyes locked on Lyra. She froze, memories of the cell flooding her mind. Ethan stepped between them. Raising his rifle, the beast lunged. Ethan fired point blank, the shot echoing like thunder. The beast roared, stumbling but not falling, in the chaos. The Baron himself descended from the warship on a hover platform. His black armor gleamed in the moonlight. He stepped onto the ledge as if the drop meant nothing to him. His eyes locked on Lyra. "You've run far enough," he said coldly. "Come back and I may spare the human's life." Lyra shook her head, her voice trembling but firm. "I will never go back to you." The Baron's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll die here," he said, raising a cruel-looking blade. Ethan moved before the Baron could strike. The two clashed, the ledge vibrating under each blow. The Baron was strong, his strikes heavy, but Ethan was faster, using the narrow space to his advantage. One hard push sent the Baron stumbling toward the edge. He caught himself, growling, and swung again. Ethan dodged and slammed his shoulder into the Baron's chest. The impact sent them both dangerously close to the drop. The warship's searchlight blinded them for a moment. In that flash, Lyra acted. She grabbed the fallen hunter's blade and drove it into the cliff beside the Baron. The stone cracked, and the ledge beneath him gave way. The Baron's eyes widened as the rock crumbled. He fell backward into the darkness below, his roar fading into the wind. Ethan pulled Lyra away from the broken edge. The remaining hunters hesitated, their leader gone. One by one, they retreated to the warship, which soon rose higher into the night sky. The hum of its engines faded, leaving only the sound of the wind. Lyra sank to her knees, shaking. Ethan knelt beside her. "It's over," he said softly. She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Not just because you saved me," she whispered, "but because you made me believe I was worth saving." Ethan smiled faintly. "Let's get you to the port," he said, "together." They followed the ledge to the path that led down into the valley. The mining outpost lights glimmered faintly in the distance. For the first time in 13 years, Lyra walked without chains, and she knew that whatever came next, she would never be a prisoner again.